My stepdaughter said I was never her father and only useful for money. I froze her cards and took back the luxury gifts I'd bought her. Her tears were endless, but too late. Don't forget to subscribe and share your experiences below. Let's get started. I'm 43 now, and when I look back, it feels like I've lived two different lives. The first was mine alone. Long days of work, small apartments, no real attachments, a man drifting between jobs and fleeting relationships. The second began when I met Lauren, and for almost 11 years I convinced myself it was real, that I had become a father, that the word family finally meant something solid in my hands. Lauren was 33 when I met her, a woman still carrying the bruises of a divorce. She lived in the northern suburbs of Seattle. In a cramped townhouse she rented more out of necessity than pride. Her two children, Emily and Zach, were the center of her world, or so she claimed. In reality, I saw a woman exhausted, stretched thin, barely holding it all together. Their biological father, Daniel, lingered in the periphery like a shadow. He showed up when it suited him, when he needed to refresh his role for outsiders. A photo on Facebook at Christmas, a quick appearance at a school play, a hollow promise of next time that left the kids waiting by the window. I came into that chaos quietly, without a plan. At first it was small things. Dinners where Emily shyly avoided eye contact. Zach challenging me with questions about sports teams he knew I didn't follow. I didn't push. I offered rides to practices, helped with homework, fixed a broken lamp in their living room. I thought consistency would earn trust. I thought presence alone would matter. When Lauren and I began dating seriously, I told myself I wasn't replacing anyone. I wasn't trying to erase their father. I was simply offering what he didn't: stability. I showed up when I said I would. I answered calls in the middle of the night. I listened, even when the words were trivial. That was my quiet promise. I would always be there. The relationship with Lauren moved faster than I expected. Within a year, my weekends at her place turned into full weeks. We spoke about merging lives, about building something that would feel like more than survival. She wanted a house, something bigger, with a yard for Zach to shoot hoops and for Emily to sit with her friends. I paid the down payment. I signed the mortgage in both our names, though she wasn't contributing much at that time. She had debts from the divorce, lingering medical bills, a job that paid just enough to keep her car running. I told myself it didn't matter. This was my chance to create a real family. And so I did. The house became my project. I worked extra hours, picked up side contracts, scraped money together to make it a home. Fresh paint in the kids' rooms, new furniture to replace the mismatched leftovers from her marriage, a garden that I planted with my own hands. Every corner bore my fingerprints. I wanted them to feel proud when friends came over, to know that someone had invested in them, not just passed through. The years stretched, and with them, my sacrifices multiplied. I taught Zach how to drive, sitting in the passenger seat while he jerked the car nervously around empty parking lots. When Emily went through her first heartbreak, it was me she cried to, not her father. I was the one who sat outside her bedroom door, listening to her muffled sobs, ready with the words she needed to hear. There were countless smaller moments too, the ones nobody notices until they're gone. Midnight runs to the pharmacy when fever spiked. Long evenings at parent-teacher conferences, nodding politely as teachers discussed strengths and weaknesses, all while Lauren sat quiet, overwhelmed. Birthday parties where I grilled food for 20 screaming teenagers, or Christmas mornings where the gifts under the tree bore my handwriting, though the children never stopped to wonder who had bought them. I poured myself into them, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I thought that was love, to give without keeping score, to sacrifice without expecting applause. Still, I'd be lying if I said I never noticed the gaps. Daniel, the biological father, appeared just enough to remind the kids of his existence. He'd bring expensive gifts, a new pair of shoes, a tablet, something flashy that he hadn't really earned. Emily would light up at first, showing it off like treasure, while Zach carried the quiet confusion of a boy who wanted more than objects. Then, just as quickly as he appeared, Daniel would vanish again. Weeks passed, months, birthdays skipped, promises broken, and yet, when his name came up, It was always with a strange reverence, as if absence itself was a kind of charm. I tried not to resent it. I told myself presence mattered more than blood. That one day, when they were old enough, they would look back and see who had truly been there. But children don't see sacrifice. They only see what shines in the moment. Lauren knew, of course. She knew who was paying for groceries, who covered medical bills, who slipped extra cash into Zach's hand before a school trip, or who made sure Emily had a dress for her prom. She thanked me in her quiet ways. A touch on the shoulder, a whispered, "You're saving us." But even her gratitude felt fragile, like she was afraid to break the illusion that this was balanced. The truth was harsher. I was carrying them. All of them. For years, I believed that was enough. That if I just kept showing up, if I just kept paying, if I just kept giving, then the bond would grow into something unshakable. I thought we had become a unit, that the word family was finally something solid I could hold. But looking back now, I see it differently. I wasn't building a family. I was investing in one. And investments expect returns. Respect. Gratitude. Something. What I didn't know then, what I only learned much later, was that I was pouring myself into a well with no bottom. Every sacrifice vanished into silence. Every act of love became invisible the moment it was given. And beneath it all, there was an unspoken truth, one that would cut me open when it finally surfaced. I would never be seen as anything more than convenient. I see that now, but back then I was blind. Back then I still believed. The night it happened, I remember the silence more than the words. Silence has a way of sharpening everything. The creak of the stairs, the murmur of voices bleeding through the walls, the faint hum of appliances in a house that was supposed to feel safe. I was sitting in the living room, half asleep in my chair after another long day of work, when I heard them. Emily and Zach, arguing upstairs. Emily had just turned 19. She was no longer a child, no longer someone whose words could be excused with, "She doesn't know better." She knew exactly what she was saying. I know that because of the way her voice cut, the precision of it, as if the sentence had been waiting in her mouth for years. "He was never my dad. All we need from him is money." I froze. The words slashed through the air, sharp enough to steal my breath. For a moment I thought I'd misheard. Maybe she said something else. Maybe exhaustion was warping the sound. But Zach's answer came quickly, muffled but clear. A defensive reply, some pushback, though I couldn't make out the details. None of it mattered. What mattered was the truth that had slipped free from her lips, unfiltered, unashamed. I sat in that chair for a long time, staring at the shadows on the walls. 11 years of sacrifice condensed into one brutal sentence. In her eyes, I was nothing more than an ATM. A man-shaped wallet who provided the foundation of her life without ever earning the title she knew belonged to someone else. I wanted to storm upstairs, demand an explanation, shake the walls with my anger. But I didn't. Instead, I sat there, the weight of every year pressing down on me. I thought of the nights I stayed up with her when fever spiked, of the Christmas mornings where the gifts bore my handwriting, of the college visits I had driven her to, the late nights at the kitchen table helping her polish essays. All of it wiped away with a single declaration. Never my dad. When Lauren came home later that night, I told her what I'd overheard. I expected outrage or at least disappointment. I expected her to sit Emily down, force her to see the cruelty of what she'd said. Instead, Lauren shrugged. "Don't take it personally," she said, her voice flat, as though she were brushing lint from a sleeve. "Teenagers can be harsh." But Emily wasn't a teenager anymore. She was a grown woman, legally an adult, fully capable of choosing her words. And the fact that Lauren excused it so easily cut me deeper than the words themselves. Because her silence, her indifference, was permission. Permission for Emily to devalue me. Permission for Zach to follow her lead. Permission for me to keep giving while receiving nothing in return. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to Lauren's quiet breathing beside me. My mind replayed Emily's words on an endless loop. Never my dad. All we need from him is money. Over and over until they weren't just words anymore. They were the truth, a truth I had been too blind, too desperate to see. The next morning, I made my decision. It wasn't rage that drove me. It was clarity, cold, merciless clarity that comes when illusions finally shatter. If money was all they saw me as, then money would be the first thing to go. I started with Emily's phone. I had been paying for it since she was 15, upgrading her plan every 2 years, making sure she never felt left out when her friends flaunted the newest device. I canceled it with a single call. Next was the laptop I had bought her for college, the jewelry I'd surprised her with on her 18th birthday, the credit card I'd opened in her name so she wouldn't struggle while studying. One by one, I gathered them, stripped them away, erased the comfort she had mistaken for entitlement. When Emily realized what I had done, her face cracked. Tears came hard and fast, a flood of excuses pouring from her mouth. She said she hadn't meant it, that she had been angry, that she had just blurted it out. But the tears didn't move me. They weren't born from regret. They were born from loss. She wasn't mourning me. She was mourning the lifestyle my labor had given her. Lauren tried to mediate. "She's young," she insisted. "She doesn't understand how much you've done. Don't punish her for one mistake." But it wasn't one mistake. It was the unveiling of the truth. For years I had given, silently, endlessly, believing it was building love, building respect, building something permanent. And in one moment, I learned that all of it had been hollow. I stood in the kitchen, Emily sobbing at the table, Lauren's eyes sharp with blame, and I said the only thing that mattered. If I am nothing more than money to her, then the money ends today. Emily begged. She reached for me, her voice shaking, promising she didn't mean it. But promises made in desperation are worthless. They are not apologies. They are bargaining chips. And I was done being bargained with. For me, that was the moment the family cracked beyond repair. Not when Emily spoke the words, but when Lauren refused to defend me. When she chose silence over truth. In that silence, I saw the years ahead. More giving, more excuses, more thankless sacrifices until I was an empty husk funding a family that never claimed me. I walked out of that kitchen knowing something had ended. That evening, Emily texted me from her room. Sorry. Just one word, hollow and weightless. No explanation. No acknowledgement of the damage done. Just the bare minimum. A word that cost her nothing, meant nothing, and demanded everything from me if I were to believe it. I didn't reply. Instead, I sat alone in the living room, staring at the mortgage papers on the table, the bills stacked neatly beside them. My name was everywhere, on the house, on the utilities, on the tuition payments. My signature kept this family alive. And yet, in their eyes I was invisible, disposable, a stand-in, a shadow, a wallet. That night, for the first time in 11 years, I allowed myself to imagine life without them. When you finally decide to leave, it doesn't feel like fire. It doesn't feel like rage. It feels like frost spreading through your veins. Slow, merciless, undeniable. That was what settled in me the week after Emily's words cut me open. I didn't shout. I didn't break things. I didn't pack in anger. I moved methodically, one drawer at a time, as though I were preparing for a business trip I wouldn't be returning from. Shirts folded neatly, books boxed. The tools I had purchased for the house, the drills, the wrenches, the things I had used to fix their broken faucets and hang their shelves, I took with me. Not because I needed them, but because I would no longer leave behind the instruments of my labor for people who spat on the hands that held them. I signed a lease for a small apartment in Tacoma, a place stripped of warmth, intentionally bare. 1 bedroom, 1 chair, 1 table. I told myself I would rather live with emptiness than live in a house where my presence was nothing but a tolerated burden. Lauren begged me not to go. She clung to me in the kitchen, tears streaking her face, her voice rising in desperation. "You're destroying this family," she said. But the truth was harsher, and I spoke it without mercy. The family was destroyed when indifference became the answer to cruelty. I'm not leaving a family. I'm leaving a cage. She flinched, but she didn't argue again. 'Cause deep down, she knew I was right. The day I carried my final box to the car, Emily watched from the top of the stairs. Her eyes were swollen, her face pale, but she said nothing. Zach lingered in the doorway, torn between loyalty to his sister and the bond we had built over the years. His silence spoke louder than words. Confusion, guilt, a longing to bridge the gap, but a fear of crossing the invisible line his mother had drawn. I drove away without looking back. The first night in Tacoma was quiet, oppressively quiet. No footsteps running down the hall. No clatter of dishes. No voices bleeding through walls. Just silence and the hum of the refrigerator. I poured myself a glass of bourbon and sat at the table, the boxes around me like sentinels of my choice. For the first time in 11 years I was alone. And though loneliness pressed against me, there was peace woven into it too. But silence never lasts. A week later, Zach showed up. No warning, no call. He knocked, hesitant, and when I opened the door, his face looked older than his years. He stepped inside, sat at my table, and for a long time he said nothing. Finally, in a voice barely above a whisper, he confessed, "I never meant to hurt you. You've always been there for me." His words cracked something inside me, but they didn't heal it. Because sincerity spoken after abandonment feels like water poured over ashes. Too late to stop the fire that already burned everything down. I nodded, accepted his honesty, but I didn't offer promises. I told him I needed distance, that I wasn't ready to return to a role that had been ripped from me with such ease. He left quietly, shoulders hunched, carrying with him the weight of a boy who realized too late what had been lost. Emily didn't come. Instead, she sent a text. Sorry. Just that. A single word stripped of effort, stripped of soul. No explanation. No attempt to understand the depth of the wound she'd carved into me. She wanted forgiveness as casually as she had thrown her words at me. Cheap, instant, without cost. I didn't respond. Some silences speak louder than lectures. Lauren called often. Sometimes her voice was sharp, full of blame, accusing me of abandoning the children when they needed me most. Other times it was soft, pleading, a whisper of regret. She said the kids were distant, angry, confused, that they were beginning to realize what they had lost, that Zach asked for me, that Emily had grown quiet, her confidence cracking under the weight of my absence. But I didn't return, because I had carried someone else's responsibility for far too long. I had paid with my time, my money, my soul, and all I had earned was the title of not real dad. They had elevated a man who vanished whenever life demanded more than a smile for social media, and they had dismissed the man who had bled for them day after day. The cruelty of it was not that they loved their biological father. Blood runs deep, and I could never fault them for craving that connection. The cruelty was in the comparison. Daniel abandoned, failed, and disappointed. Yet in their mouths his name was spoken with reverence, while mine was spoken with disdain. I was measured not against what he gave, but against what he represented, the illusion of belonging that blood carries, even when empty. That comparison was a blade I could no longer endure, so I stayed gone. Lauren tried one last time. She came to Tacoma late one night, standing in my doorway with eyes red from crying. She told me I was punishing the children, that I was breaking bonds that could still be mended. I listened, but I didn't bend. I told her bonds built on contempt are not bonds at all. They are chains, and I had cut mine. She left with her shoulders shaking, and as I watched her disappear into the night, I felt the final thread snap. The weeks that followed were quiet. Zach's visits stopped. Emily never sent another message. Lauren's calls grew fewer until they ended entirely. The house I had left behind became theirs alone. Theirs to pay for, theirs to maintain, theirs to struggle with. I had given them years, but I would not give them the rest of my life. And yet, even in the silence, regret lingered like a ghost. Not my regret. Theirs. I could feel it pressing at the edges of my solitude. Their realization settling in as the weight of bills mounted, as the absence of my labor became unavoidable. They would never say it aloud, not then, but I knew they had beg asterisk N to understand. They had lost the only man who had ever stayed. I had left not in anger, but in clarity. I had left because staying would have destroyed what little of myself I had left. And though the quiet of Tacoma was heavy, though loneliness pressed hard, it was cleaner than the contempt I had endured. I wasn't their father. They had told me so, and now, finally, I believed them. Now I live alone. No children thundering up the stairs, no voices rising in the kitchen, no photos taped to the refrigerator. The walls of my apartment are bare, and sometimes when I wake in the middle of the night, I hear only the hum of the heater and the faint groan of the pipes. For some, that silence might feel suffocating. For me, it feels like oxygen. It took time to adjust. At first, I caught myself setting 2 plates at dinner out of habit. I reached for my phone to check if Zach had made it home safe from practice, before remembering there was no practice, no reason to check. When I walked past the women's section at the store, I had the impulse to buy Emily a sweater, a necklace, something to make her smile. Then I remembered her words, sharp and merciless. Never my dad. And the impulse died. The transition wasn't clean. Family never disappears overnight. It lingers, like smoke after a fire, clinging to your clothes long after you've stepped outside. Some nights I would dream of them. Emily laughing in the back seat as we drove to the beach, Zach's grin the day he finally parallel parked without hitting the curb, Lauren leaning into me on the porch, whispering that she couldn't have done it without me. I would wake with those images burning in my chest, and then the truth would settle like ash. None of it mattered. It was all built on borrowed ground. I poured 11 years into that house, into that family. I worked myself raw so they could have security, opportunity, comfort. And when the illusion cracked, I realized I had never truly been part of it. I was a convenient placeholder, a provider who had mistaken utility for belonging. Now, in the quiet of Tacoma, I see things clearly. I've end dating again. Slowly, cautiously. I'm up front from the beginning. I'm not looking to be anyone's savior, anyone's substitute, anyone's temporary dad. I won't step into another man's shadow and bleed myself dry for children who look at me with disdain. If someone calls me not real, if someone dismisses me as temporary, I won't argue. I won't plead. I'll walk away, because now I know what I'm worth. That's the cruelest lesson I had to learn. Worth isn't defined by sacrifice. It's defined by how your sacrifice is received. You can give everything, and if the people around you see it as obligation instead of devotion, then you are not loved, you are used. I think about Emily sometimes. I wonder if the words she threw at me echo in her head now, the way they echo in mine. Maybe she regrets them. Maybe she doesn't. Regret without action is just another form of silence. Zach at least tried to bridge the gap, but I had already made my decision. A half-hearted attempt cannot rebuild what has been deliberately broken. And Lauren, I wonder if she lies awake now in that house, hearing the emptiness where my labor used to be. I wonder if she has realized that silence is not neutral, that by refusing to defend me she chose a side. Indifference is betrayal in disguise. It erodes bonds more effectively than cruelty, because it disguises itself as peace while it rots the foundation. The biological father, Daniel, still drifts in and out. He shows up with his rehearsed smiles, his carefully staged photos, his empty promises. And the children cling to him, because blood has its own gravity, no matter how poisoned. That's the cruel truth of blended families. You can outwork, outgive, outstay the biological parent, but you will always be measured against the illusion of blood. And illusions, no matter how hollow, are powerful. So I cut myself free. Sometimes people ask if I regret it. If I regret leaving, if I regret cutting off the support, if I regret walking away from children I raised for over a decade. My answer is simple. No. I regret only that I didn't do it sooner. I regret that I allowed myself to be blinded by hope, that I convinced myself love could be built through endurance alone. Endurance without respect is slavery, and I lived as a slave far too long. Now, when I wake to silence, I breathe easier. I don't carry the weight of ungrateful mouths. I don't labor for people who spit contempt in the same breath they spend my money. My life is leaner, smaller, quieter, but it is mine. Do I miss them? In fragments, yes. I miss the version of them I believed in, the version that existed only in my illusions. I missed the fantasy of being a father, the imagined gratitude that never came. But missing illusions is not the same as missing reality. Reality was harsh, unrelenting, and clear. I was never their father. And so I learned. Learned that you can't force love where it doesn't exist. Learned that silence is as damning as cruelty. Learned that respect is not optional. And most of all, I learned that when someone shows you what you mean to them, when they look you in the eye and say you're not my dad, you must believe them. That belief is liberation. So now I live with that liberation. I don't chase apologies. I don't wait for phone calls that will never come. I don't check the mailbox expecting reconciliation. I have walked away, and the road behind me is ash. The question that lingers, though, is not mine alone. It is for anyone who is given, sacrificed, endured. When you are treated as nothing, when your presence is tolerated but never valued, what would you do? Would you keep giving, hoping someday the scales would balance? Or would you do what I did, cut the cord, walk away, and reclaim yourself from the prison of thankless devotion? I made my choice. Was I wrong? Or was it the only way to survive?